And welcome back to Ball with Y'all. This is season 2 here on the show. So great to have you here today. I consider myself lucky to have you here for another season of Ball with Y'all. And let me just say, it is a great day to be here with you all for a number of reasons, right? Of course, we have season 2. You heard some new elements. We got a new song, right? You got a new song. We got a new direction this year. We'll talk about that here shortly. A new season, rather. We'll talk about that here shortly. And we also have a few other elements that you'll hear throughout the show as well. Now, I got to say something. You'll notice I won't really move my head a whole lot here today. I was in an accident about a week or so ago. Car got totaled and so on. But everything's all right. I just can't really move my head. But hey, the show must go on. So here we are. I've got a duty. I have a duty to you all, and I'm going to deliver on that promise. So here we are, January 19th. The first show of season 2. A lot that we're going to get to here in this season. First things first. You might be thinking, okay, this is an SEC-centric show, an SEC football-centric show. And we are more than 200 days away from SEC football, right? We're going to see some spring practices, some spring games here in the month of April. And we'll start to hear some rumors over the summer. We'll get SEC media days in July. But that's a lot of time until we see football again in late August, early September. So you might be thinking, okay, how are we going to cover that ground? What are we going to be doing between now and September? Well, listen, yes, this is an SEC football show, but you also have to keep in mind that the SEC has roots just about everywhere. You look at the NFL playoffs right now. How many SEC guys are in the NFL playoffs? In fact, I saw a stat the other day. I think an LSU player is on every single team right now in the playoffs with the exception of one, and that's the Green Bay Packers. So long story short, this is now essentially a sports show, but we still have an underpinning of SEC football. So if there's a headline, we'll talk about it. If Nick Saban retires, which I hope he doesn't, if he does, we'll talk about it. If nothing's going on, that's okay. I'm sure I'll probably find some sort of college football headline to talk about between now and September. But keep in mind, at the end of the day, this is an SEC-centric show. So we're going to start there, and then whatever else follows, we'll get into it. We might get into baseball. We might get into basketball. We might get into the NFL playoffs, which I'm sure we probably will do today. So keep in mind a lot that we're going through here throughout season 2, and I'm really looking forward to it because we're kind of changing the direction just a tad. But again, our roots are remaining the same here this spring. Now, that gives you a direction as to where we are going. We are only a few days away, or a few days removed, rather, from the national championship game. We'll talk about that here today. We'll talk about some of the transfer portal news and some of our top moves when it comes to the transfer portal. Now, first off, what is the transfer portal? We'll talk about that. If you're not familiar with the transfer portal and what that all looks like, we'll talk about that here today. And then we'll wrap up with our Super Bowl, and I guess to that extent, NFL playoff picks now that we are done with Wild Card Weekend. So with that said, let's get into story number 1. How'd you like that? We got a sound effect now. Yeah, that was cool, right? Okay, see, new element right there. Sound effects on Ball with Y'all season 2. Back and better than ever. See, I would have turned my head there, but trust me, it's there. I promise. Again, actually, that's a great segue. Before we get back into the story here, please join us on YouTube. I will make sure that I have the YouTube link in the description. Feel free to chat on our YouTube page. Send us some messages. Follow, like, subscribe, send to your friends, do whatever. We are so excited to be getting out to a broader audience here in the spring and to be on YouTube in the spring as well. So, like I said, story number 1, let's get into it. The national championship game. Alabama, Georgia. I don't need to tell you what happened. You know what happened. Georgia won. Alabama lost. That's that, right? And I needed a few days, right? Granted, last week was not a great week. We've already kind of discussed some of why that was the case. I needed a few days to kind of reassess as to why it all went down the way it did. Now, obviously, there are some components that are pretty obvious. Josh Jobe, Jalen Armour-Davis, John Mechie, and Jamison Williams. 4 starters for the Crimson Tide. None of them were available. Now, you can't reasonably sit here and tell me that game would have been the same had those 4 starters been on the field. Now, but I'm also not one to sit here and say, well, if we had our guys, it might have been different. You play with who you got, right? And the fact that Alabama was still in that position, kudos to them. credit to Nick Saban and the job he's done in this year with first time starting quarterback, a number of young guys on both sides of the ball, an incredible effort and an incredible showing for a team that we really didn't have a lot of expectations for. And I just have to level with you real quick. On the first episode of this show, I said that Alabama would not win the national championship. And I also said they would not win the SEC championship. Now, I have to clarify because there was kind of a selfish reason behind that. At the time, when I said I didn't see Alabama winning the SEC championship game, I didn't see Alabama winning the national championship game, it's because I knew ultimately this team was probably not good enough to win a national championship, right? But I thought they could get in that picture, right? And I would rather them go ahead and lose, get out of the way, and not break my heart at the very end. And so I kind of saw this whole situation coming, and I was like, you know what, let's just say they don't even make the playoffs. Done, right? And then, of course, they make the playoffs after beating Georgia in the SEC championship game, and the rest is history. But ultimately speaking, this team overachieved by all accounts. In my estimation, this should have been a 2-loss team at least. And they came, which I guess, and technically they were a 2-loss team, but in the sense of going into the postseason play or whatever else, this team did not even deserve to be in the conversation probably by the 6 weeks of the season, which is, of course, I believe when they lost to Texas A&M. This team was not remotely close to the teams of 2020, 2019, and so on. This is, by all accounts, one of Nick Saban's worst Alabama teams, and they're still incredibly talented. So that's all to say that Alabama is only set up for more success in the years to come. Now, on the Georgia side, they took advantage when the opportunity presented itself. They struck when the iron was hot. I believe that's a saying or an idiom or so on. Somewhere in the neighborhood. They identified their opportunity and they took advantage. Now, I said all those injuries, right? Kirby Smart identified it. Dan Lanning on the sideline, he's headed to, he's in Oregon right now as their head coach. But when he was wrapping up his duties for Georgia on that Monday night, he said when Jamison Williams went out with an injury, it was a different game. Anybody with a brain can identify that Jamison Williams, his injury, changed the trajectory of that game. As soon as I saw it, I kind of knew where the game was going. I still had a little bit of hope, but I kind of knew, right? And to Georgia's credit, they took advantage when the opportunity presented itself. This was the best opportunity that Georgia's had to win a national championship game since probably 2012. And before that, I couldn't tell you. I really couldn't tell you when the last time that Georgia was firmly in position to potentially win a national championship. And they did it here, and they took advantage when the opportunity presented itself. And if you think about it, if they hadn't, how would Kirby be looking right now? How would the head coach be looking right now for Georgia? How would Georgia fans be responding right now? How would Georgia players be responding right now? And how does the offseason look for that Georgia team? Yes, I know they have I think a top 2 recruiting class right now, or top 3, somewhere in the neighborhood. So they're set up for success. But how do those recruits respond to yet another loss in the national championship game? So this game mattered so much. It mattered a tremendous amount to both teams. We know that. But for Georgia, just a little bit more, it felt like, because it sets them up to be a different program moving forward. Now, this also could be the same Georgia team that will only win one championship for another 4 years. We don't really know. I think Kirby is a great coach, and if Saban's not in the way, he might just do that. He might win more national championships here in the near future. But this could be setting this team up for a great deal of success in the next 2, 5, 10 years. And if that's the case, watch out for the Georgia Bulldogs. It's kind of crazy to think that, we thought Florida for a while with Dan Mullen could be the future of the SEC East, right? And then we thought, Heupel could come in and really change the tone in Tennessee, or even Beamer, right? Shane Beamer came in, and we'll talk about him later on here in season 2 because there's a lot to talk about as far as Shane Beamer goes with South Carolina. There are a number of talented coaches in the SEC East. It's not just Kirby Smart, but the fact that Kirby Smart in 5 years, 6 years, was finally able to climb that mountain and overcome the giant that is Nick Saban. An incredible job by him. And now, of course, you'll probably see a little bit of a drop-off here in year 2, or not year 2, here next year for Kirby Smart, losing some of those senior-level players on the defensive side and even some on the offensive side. But still, an incredible job. And whether it takes a couple years to get back to this level or whatever else that case may be, Georgia, it will be a force to reckon with in the SEC and, for that matter, in the national picture for quite some time. Now let's talk about how Georgia won the game. I said that they needed to make Bryce Young uncomfortable. They did it, right? I said they needed to mix up those looks, mix up coverage, make Bryce think that he's seeing things that aren't there. They did that pretty well. I said they needed to minimize Jameson Williams. They didn't really do that because they didn't have to, because he wasn't in the game. So that worked out well for them. I said they didn't need to rely on Stetson. Well, their defense got them there, and their run game ultimately got them there. George Pickens, he had a prominent role in the game as well. And on top of that, Alabama was just not able to get enough pressure on Stetson when it mattered. Early in the game, they were fine. Alabama's defense was great. But as the game dragged along, Georgia took advantage. And Georgia identified where they could really bully that Alabama defensive line, the Alabama secondary, the Alabama linebackers, and the game just was not the same from that point forward. It was crazy because 13 minutes to go in the game, it looked like it was going to be one type of result. And then a few minutes later, it goes a completely opposite direction, and Georgia's on the field celebrating with confetti and so on. So all in all, a great opportunity to see the Bulldogs win. First time in 40 years, 42 years, somewhere in the neighborhood. Really incredible. Honestly, super happy for them. I've got some family who are Georgia fans, and they're really basking in this. So credit to them, and incredible showing for you, and good luck in the coming offseason and into the 2022 season. Now let's go into story number 2. We are currently wrapping up, of course, or actually, I guess we're about to head into the final day of National Signing Day. So there's a lot that's going to happen here in the offseason as far as high school recruits coming into their future home, their future college homes. But we've also had a number of transfer portal moves. Now, if you're not familiar with the transfer portal, what is that, right? At one point in time, I believe in December, there were 400 guys in the transfer portal. They submitted their paperwork, whatever else, to leave their current institution to go elsewhere. And now, not all 400 of those guys are going to leave, and we'll talk about some of that here with our top. Well, we'll list our top 10 transfer portal moves of the past few weeks that we've seen. But up to 400 guys at one point in time. And it really, there's a number of reasons as to why that's the case. People are chasing money, or they're chasing opportunity at the next level in the NFL, like Bo Nix. There's a number of reasons as to why guys are looking to transfer and looking to change schools. And this whole transfer portal thing, it's kind of becoming almost like a joke in some ways, because guys just kind of throw their name in there just to kind of see what interest is out there. But nonetheless, there's been a lot of moves this, I wouldn't say the offseason, because we just reached the offseason a few days ago, but the past 6 weeks or so. So let's get into our top 10 transfer portal moves. First off, we got an honorable mention, Paul Tyson. Now, of course, he is Bear Bryant's great-grandson. He played at Alabama the last couple of years. He was the holder this year on extra points and field goals until the Auburn game, in which game he ended up muffing a snap or two, and he didn't see the field again. And now he's transferring to Arizona State. It's unthinkable to think about Bear Bryant's great-grandson going anywhere but the University of Alabama, and he's doing that just now with the Sun Devils. Honorable mention, Paul Tyson to Arizona State. Number 10, Dillon Gabriel to Oklahoma. Of course, Dillon Gabriel, former UCF quarterback. He was under Gus Malzahn this past year. I believe he ended up breaking his collarbone or somewhere in that neighborhood pretty early on in the season, and then he ended up transferring out. Looked like he might have gone to UCLA or a couple other places, and now he's settling on Oklahoma. And this sets up a really interesting situation, because you also look at Caleb Williams, who was Oklahoma's quarterback for a good bit this year. He announced also in the same time frame that he was looking to transfer, and at the time of recording right now, he has not selected where he's going to go. Some rumors say that he might go to USC to go be with Lincoln Riley. Still pretty unclear, but still a great situation for Dillon Gabriel. I think he'll do well in Oklahoma's system. And if Caleb Williams does end up following Lincoln Riley out to USC, that'll probably be a good move for him as well. Number 9, Jaleel Billingsley, the tight end, former Alabama Crimson Tide member. He is now going over to the University of Texas to be a Longhorn. Now, Jaleel Billingsley, a couple years ago in the 2020 season, I loved Jaleel Billingsley. I thought he was a great asset to the team. Going into the 2021 season, you heard some rumors that maybe he wasn't necessarily the most team oriented. He might not necessarily be all in when it comes to conditioning and practice or whatever else. And Saban made some comments here and there that, like, oh, you really need to buy in. You really need to earn your role. And so then when a few days before the Miami game, the depth chart comes out and he's the third string tight end, you have to wonder why that's the case. And it felt like at some point he never really fit in. And even in the national championship game where he was really needed in certain points, he quite literally dropped the ball. And now he's headed over to the University of Texas, where he'll be playing Alabama in week 2 anyway. We've also got Emery Jones at number 8. Now, here's the deal about this one. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Emery Jones might be staying at the University of Florida. He's the quarterback for the University of Florida, for the Gators. And there was a point in bowl season where he announced that he was going to leave. And now it looks like he might be staying. And I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing or a bad thing if you're a Gator fan. He wasn't exactly great this year, but he could do well under Billy Napier's system. Billy Napier, of course, the new head coach for the Gators. He could do wonders for Emery Jones. We don't really know. So I think when I say that that's number 8 here, that's number 8 as far as notability and how it could impact a number of things, particularly in the SEC East, if he does stay and if he is, in fact, named the starter. Number 7, Miles Brennan, quarterback for LSU, was announced pretty early on that he was going to be transferring from LSU, as well as Max Johnson, and then ended up staying. Miles Brennan is now staying in Baton Rouge to play for Brian Kelly and those LSU Tigers. And honestly, Miles Brennan, he has his moments, right? He could be a really great quarterback. So this could be a good opportunity for him, and it might be the right opportunity for Brian Kelly and the right quarterback for that system. So that could be a significant move in the SEC West, the fact that he is staying. Another move in the SEC West, this is from the ACC to the SEC. Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a running back from Georgia Tech. He announced that he's transferring to the University of Alabama. And honestly, looking at this, because Brian Robinson Jr., I haven't officially heard yet if he's going to the NFL. I think he has to go to the NFL. But otherwise, the Alabama running back room was decimated by injuries this year. They don't have a whole lot of experience behind Brian Robinson Jr. So the fact that they're getting Gibbs in, I hear he's an incredible athlete. He did incredible things for Georgia Tech this year. Of course, the Yellow Jackets are pretty run-oriented, so you have to be really good as a running back to get into that system. So the fact that he's coming over from the Yellow Jackets to the Crimson Tide should do wonders for that offense next year. Number 5, Spencer Rattler to South Carolina. Now, Spencer Rattler, he was the Oklahoma quarterback this year for 3 or 4 games. Last year, all season, he had really bright spots under Lincoln Riley, and then he kind of tanked at some point in time. So I don't really know how to judge this. This is one of my more intriguing moves, right? I'm not entirely sure how it will unfold, but I think the one piece for Shane Beaman this year, they went, 6-6, 7-6? If they had a quality quarterback not named Zeb Nolan or Luke Doty, that team could have feasibly competed for second or third in the SEC East. So an incredible move for that program. It'll be something especially to watch this season. Max Johnson, he went from LSU, he's one of the guys that left LSU, to Texas A&M. And his brother will also be playing for Texas A&M this year. He'll be signing on as a recruit here on National Signing Day. And ultimately, Max Johnson, he kind of has his moments too. You don't really know what to expect from him. But Jimbo, for a while at Texas A&M, Jimbo just needed a good quarterback. And, he had this past year Zach Calzada, not that great, but good enough. If he has a good quarterback, that system goes from good to great, and then from great to excellent, competing for national championships and so on. I'm not sure if Max Johnson will do that, but he's the closest they've got in quite some time. Speaking of Zach Calzada, he announced that he's going to Auburn. This is our number 3 move of the transfer portal period so far. Zach Calzada, he's going to Auburn. He's the only quarterback that's playing football right now that's beaten Alabama, because Stetson Bennett's gone and Joe Burrow's in the NFL. So Zach Calzada, if you're an Auburn fan, that's something to hang your hat on. Like, hey, we have a quarterback who's beaten Alabama. But that also just happened to be Zach Calzada's best game ever. And he has not been good ever since. So take that as you may. Number 2, Eli Ricks to Alabama. LSU defensive back. He got injured at some point in time, I believe, announced he was transferring, and he's going to the Crimson Tide. Now, I talked about Josh Jobe. He was hurt this year. He's announced that he's going to the NFL. Jalen Armour Davis, he got hurt this year, announced that he's going to the NFL. Behind them, they didn't really have a whole lot of experience in the defensive secondary. So getting Eli Ricks into that locker room will be massive for the Crimson Tide, and particularly for that defense that is already losing some pieces because Christian Harris, he announced that he's going out, right? But they're keeping some other pieces like Jordan Battle, DeMarco Helms, and so on. So that defense should be pretty strong next year, and Eli Ricks only adds to that defense's abilities next season. Lastly, we mentioned it, number one, Bo Nix to Oregon. Now, I don't really understand this move a whole lot. I don't really know if he thought he was going to lose his starting job. I don't really know what the decision was for Bo Nix. He had a deal with Milo's. Milo's is a great restaurant in the state of Alabama. He had an NIL, in name, image, and likeness, NIL deal with Milo's. So he was like a Milo sponsored athlete. Great opportunity for him. He had other deals throughout the state as well, I believe. And now he's going to Oregon to play for Dan Lanning, former Georgia defensive coordinator. He was their defensive coordinator about a week ago. And his first game of the season is against Georgia. And also now you're in the same conference as Lincoln Riley at USC, as Chip Kelly at UCLA. I don't understand, right? Maybe it might be a good move for him, but he also has competition. He's not even guaranteed to be the starter at Oregon right now, from my understanding. So that'll be a really interesting move, and that's the reason I have it number one, because what happens to Bo Nix? Did he make this move because he wants to go to the NFL? And how does he actually see Oregon taking him to the NFL level? Because from what we saw from him at Auburn, the good Bo Nix is great. The bad Bo Nix is a sight to behold, to say the least. So that is our transfer portal top 10. Again, we go from top to bottom. Bo Nix, Eli Ricks, Zach Calzada, Max Johnson, Spencer Rattler, Jahmyr Gibbs, Miles Brennan, Emery Jones, Jaleel Billingsley, and Dylan Gabriel. On to story number 3. We are wrapping up, or we just wrapped up, rather, the wildcard weekend here in the NFL. We saw some great games. We saw a wild finish in Dallas between the San Francisco 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys, where Dallas quite literally ran out of time. And for those of us who love to see the Cowboys lose, it was a beautiful sight to behold. You saw Tom Brady, he looked scary, honestly, against the Philadelphia Eagles in Tampa Bay on Sunday. Tampa Bay looked strong once again. We saw the Buffalo Bills. I don't really know, but I think they might be for real. I mean, they beat New England 47-17, and New England's been pretty good this year, right? They had a strong team this year. Mac Jones had been doing incredible things for the Patriots. So the fact that they went out there and just decimated them, played a perfect offensive game, with the exception of 2 missed extra points. I think the Bills might be for real based off of what we saw this past weekend. The Chiefs, we saw them. They started out slow against the Pittsburgh Steelers and then came on strong thereafter. I think they scored 5 or 6 straight touchdowns, somewhere in that neighborhood. The Chiefs have always been for real. Even when they started out slow on the year, I think they were under 500. They were always for real. You never really could discount the Chiefs. And here they are sitting in prime position to maybe make the AFC Championship game again. Lastly, we saw the Bengals. I don't really think they're going to last long, honestly. They struggled against the Las Vegas Raiders. And, Joe Burrow's a good quarterback, right? He's a great quarterback. Jamar Chase is a great wide receiver. The things that team has been able to do, only a year away from being, 4-12 last year or 5-11, somewhere in that neighborhood. This team has made tremendous strides, but they're not the Buffalo Bills. They're not the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not the Tennessee Titans right now. So I don't really know how far they're going to get here in the NFL playoffs. So with that said, let's talk about our picks as far as who will come out of this weekend's games, right? I think we're going to see Green Bay win. I think we're going to see Tampa Bay win. I think we'll see Tennessee advance to the AFC Championship game. And I think we'll see Kansas City advance to the AFC Championship game. I think they will take down Buffalo, even though Buffalo's for real, even though Buffalo's a good team. I think we'll see Kansas City and Tennessee take on each other for the AFC Championship game. I think we'll see Green Bay and Tampa Bay, the 2 Bays, take on each other for the NFC Championship game, much like last year. And to that extent, I have Green Bay and Kansas City going to the Super Bowl. Now, it's one of those things, kind of like Georgia. If Green Bay doesn't do it this year, when do they do it, right? Aaron Rodgers, at one point in time, he talked about leaving the organization over the summer, and now this team is starting to click on all cylinders. That offense is scary, but it's almost deceptively scary. On the other side, Kansas City, I know maybe Tennessee might get Derrick Henry back here shortly, and we don't really know what he'll look like, but if he's back and he's 100%, entirely different situation. But as it stands right now, Kansas City is probably a better team than maybe all four of these teams, but absolutely better than the Tennessee Titans. That offense, when it's going, it's humming. Also, it's beautiful, right? That defense has been pretty good lately. It's not great, but it's not bad. I think Kansas City can really push Tennessee's buttons in the right places and get themselves back in the Super Bowl come February 13th. And speaking of February 13th, I think we'll see the Green Bay Packers win it all. I don't have a score for you. I don't have a spread for you, so I can't really tell you a score, but I think Green Bay will ultimately come out of this alive as your Super Bowl champions. So that wraps up our show today. What did we talk about? We talked about the national championship game, why Georgia won, and what it means for the road ahead. Why did it matter that Georgia won? And what do we see unfold over the offseason and going into spring practices and spring games and the SEC media days and so on? What do we see going into the 2022 season, right? Speaking of the 2022, wow, one more time. Speaking of the 2022 season, that was the one. We talked about the transfer portal, who we like, and what are the biggest moves of the past few weeks, and what we're really looking for in the next few weeks as well. There are going to be a lot of guys that are still sitting in the transfer portal that haven't made decisions. For example, Connor Bazelak of Missouri, he's still sitting in the portal. He hasn't announced where he's going, right? He's their quarterback, but is he their quarterback? We don't know. There are a number of guys that haven't made those decisions yet, and we just identified our top 10, but I'm sure there'll be more in the next few weeks to come. And, of course, we wrapped up with our NFL postseason picks. Again, I've got the Green Bay Packers and the Kansas City Chiefs going to the Super Bowl, with Green Bay winning it all for the first time since the 2010 season. So, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the first episode of Season 2 here with Ball with Y'all. I am so thankful that you chose to spend your morning, your afternoon, your evening, whatever it is, with me to talk about sports, to talk about college football, to talk about NFL football, and whatever else we may get into here in the next few weeks. A couple notes as we move forward. We will have one show a week moving forward. On Wednesdays, we'll recap whatever we saw on the weekends, because, sports are predominantly on the weekends, and preview whatever we'll be seeing in the weekend ahead. We'll talk about major headlines and so on. So please be sure to like, subscribe, do whatever so you do not miss an episode. Our next episode will be on January 26th. So as always, thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to talk some ball with y'all, and we'll see you next time.